Are you the sad man Miss Rosa whispers about? Who let you in here? I'm Noah. I live with my mommy now. Are your legs broken? Get out. This is not a place for children. I'm not scared of you. You should be. My mummy says scary people are just hurting on the inside. The room does not move. 6 men who have watched grown enemies beg for their lives are waiting for this boy to be dragged out by his collar. Instead, Vittorio Moretti looks down at a 5-year-old's open hand resting on his tattooed fist. And for the first time since his mother died, he has no answer ready. Have you ever wondered what it would take to soften a man everyone else had already given up on? Because you're about to watch it happen, one small hand at a time. If you've ever been the person the world walked past, tell me in the comments. I read everyone. Hit like. And let's go back to the night this all started. The apartment had one working light bulb and a landlord who'd stopped answering calls. Elena Carter sat on the kitchen floor with the eviction notice folded in her lap, counting $17 for the 3rd time as if the number might change. Behind her, Noah lay on his stomach on the carpet, crayon moving in slow circles. Look, Mummy, that's our new house. He held up the drawing. A mansion with too many windows, and 2 stick figures holding hands in the doorway. We'll live somewhere really big one day. Elena smiled the way she'd learned to smile for him, steady on the outside, breaking everywhere else. 18 months since Daniel's accident. 18 months of insurance calls that went nowhere and jobs that let her go the moment Noah got sick or the sitter didn't show. 3 days until they had nowhere to be. The agency called that evening. A live-in caregiving position, the woman said, voice flat like she'd read the same warning too many times. Private estate. The patient was Vittorio Moretti, a name people in this city didn't say above a whisper. 23 caregivers had already quit. Most didn't last the week. He's not cruel by accident, the woman said. He wants everyone gone. It's easier for him that way. Does the position allow a child? Elena asked. A pause. Absolutely not, Miss Carter. Mr. Moretti's staff have strict instructions. No exceptions. No exceptions. Elena looked at Noah, still coloring, still certain the big house was coming. I don't have anyone else, she said. And it wasn't quite a lie. That night she packed everything they owned into one duffel bag. It took 11 minutes. Will there be a garden? Noah asked, watching her fold his shirts. I think so, baby. Will the sad man like me? Will the sad man like me? Elena zipped the bag shut before he could see her hands shaking. We're going to find out. The taxi let them off at a gate that looked like it belonged to a fortress, not a home. Iron bars twice Elena's height. A gravel drive so long the house at the end of it looked like a smudge of grey stone. Noah pressed his face to the bars. It's bigger than my drawing, he whispered. It didn't feel bigger. It felt hollow. The fountain in the front circle had gone dry. Its basin gone green with algae. Every curtain on the 2nd floor was drawn shut in the middle of the afternoon, like the house itself was holding its breath. 2 men in dark suits stood at the entrance, hands folded, watching them approach without a flicker of welcome. The door opened before Elena could knock. A woman in her 60s stood there, silver hair pinned back so tight it looked painful. A set of keys at her hip that jangled when she moved. Mrs. Bellini, head of household. She didn't offer her hand. Her eyes dropped to Noah and stayed there a beat too long. The agency didn't mention a child. He won't be any trouble, Elena said quickly. He's quiet. He stays in the servants' wing. Rosa Bellini's face didn't change, but something in her posture did. A small, tired softening, like a woman deciding not to fight a battle that wasn't hers to fight. Mr. Moretti's rules are not mine to bend, Ms. Carter, but I've buried enough good people's warnings under this roof to know when to look the other way. Once. That's all I can offer you. She led them through a hall, lined with oil portraits of men who all shared the same hard jaw, the same unsmiling eyes. A giant of a man fell into step behind them without a word. Arms like tree trunks, a scar cutting through one eyebrow, silent as a shadow. Marco De Luca, Rosa said, not slowing down. Head of security. He doesn't talk much. Doesn't need to. Marco gave the smallest nod Elena had ever seen a person give and said nothing at all. Near the staircase, a thin man in a grey suit looked up from a folder of papers, his eyes moving over Elena with the flat interest of someone appraising furniture. Anthony Ricci, Rosa said, the family's lawyer. He's here more than he should be. Richie didn't extend a hand either. He simply watched them pass. The way a man watches a door he expects to open the wrong way eventually. Elena's room in the servants' wing was small but clean. A cot, a narrow window, a second cot pushed into the corner that Rosa had, without a word, already made up for Noah. "Keep him quiet after 7, Rosa said at the door. "Mr. Moretti doesn't sleep well. He doesn't like being reminded that the rest of the house does." That evening, exhausted from the long day of orientation, Elena finally allowed herself to sit down for 5 minutes, just 5, with her eyes closed against the narrow window. When she opened them, Noah was gone. She checked the cot. She checked the hallway. She checked the kitchen, where Rosa was arranging a dinner tray with hands too stiff for the servants in the house. No one had seen him. Elena's heart climbed into her throat as she moved faster down a corridor she didn't know, past doors she'd been told never to open, toward the one wing of the house where every guard she passed suddenly refused to meet her eyes. At the end of the hall, the enormous double doors of Vittorio Moretti's private study stood slightly, impossibly, open, and from somewhere inside, she heard her son's voice. The study smelled like leather and old smoke. Noah stood just inside the doorway, small against the dark wood shelves and the heavy curtains pulled tight over every window. In the center of the room, in a wheelchair angled toward a cold fireplace, sat the man the whole house whispered about. Noah didn't run. He didn't hide behind a chair the way the maids did, or lower his eyes the way the guards did. He tilted his head, studying the wheels, the ink crawling up the man's knuckles and disappearing under his sleeve, the untouched glass of whiskey sweating on the side table. "Why do you have a chair with wheels?" Noah asked. Vittorio's head turned slowly, and for a moment the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "Who let you in here?" The door was open. Noah stepped closer. "Do your legs hurt? Get out. Get out." The words came sharp, practiced, the same tone that had emptied this room of every visitor who'd ever dared linger. "This is not a place for children. I'm not scared of you." "You should be." Noah considered this the way children consider most impossible things, briefly and without much concern. "My mummy says people get mean when they're hurting inside. Are you hurting?" Vittorio said nothing. In 50 years, no one in this house had asked him that question. His captains asked about numbers. His relatives asked about wills. His doctors asked about pain scales, 1 to 10, as if grief could be measured the same way as a fractured hip. No one had ever simply asked if he was hurting. "I'm Noah," the boy said, filling the silence the way only a 5-year-old could. "I live downstairs now, with my mummy. She cleans things. I don't want a maid's son wandering my house." "Okay." Noah sat down on the rug anyway, cross-legged, entirely unbothered by the dismissal. He pulled a folded paper from his pocket, soft at the creases, clearly carried for days. "I drew this yesterday. Do you want to see it?" "No." Noah showed him anyway. A crayon house. Too many windows. 2 stick figures at the door holding hands. Vittorio's jaw tightened, but his eyes moved over the drawing longer than he intended them to. "Go back to your mother," he said. Quieter this time. Elena found them a minute later, breathless from running the length of the east wing, certain she was about to lose the only roof over her son's head. She skidded to a stop in the doorway, already reaching for Noah's shoulder, already forming the apology that had been building in her chest since the moment she'd found his cot empty. "Mr. Moretti, I'm so sorry. He must have wandered off. It will not happen. The boy talks too much." Vittorio didn't look at her. His gaze stayed fixed on the dead fireplace. Elena froze, waiting for the rest. The order to pack their bags. The call to Rosa. The end of everything she'd risked to get here. It didn't come. Vittorio said nothing else. He simply lifted his glass, took a slow drink, and let the silence stretch until Elena understood, with disbelief, that this was as close to permission as the man ever gave. She pulled Noah gently toward the door. At the threshold, Noah turned back. "Bye, Mr. V," he said, as if he'd already decided the name months ago. Vittorio didn't answer, but long after the door closed, his eyes stayed on the empty rug where the boy had been sitting. It became a pattern neither of them spoke of out loud. Every afternoon while Elena scrubbed floors 2 wings away, Noah slipped down the hall with something in his pocket. A biscuit smuggled from the kitchen, a fresh drawing, once a smooth grey stone he'd found in the garden, and declared, "For luck." He asked about the tattoos. tracing the ink on Vittoria's forearm with one finger, while the old man sat rigid, unmoving, unsure what to do with a touch that wasn't a threat. Does this one hurt? They all hurt. That was the point once. That's silly, Noah said, already moving on to the next question, already certain the conversation belonged to him. Marco noticed it first. The wheelchair rolled a few inches closer to the window some mornings. Curtains crack just slightly to let in light that hadn't touched the room in years. Rosa noticed the tray of biscuits disappearing faster than one old man alone could eat them. Even the guards standing silent at their posts began to notice something they didn't have words for. Vittorio Moretti, for the first time since his wife's funeral, occasionally checked the clock before 4 in the afternoon. He never smiled. His temper hadn't softened where it mattered. He still barked orders that sent staff scattering, still refused his pain medication out of some stubborn desire to feel every hour he had left rather than sleep through them. He told Rosa more than once that he was tired of being kept alive by people too cowardly to let a dying man die in peace. But at 4 o'clock, without fail, he stopped watching the door like he wanted it closed. 2 floors below, in a room with the shades drawn for a different reason, 3 men sat around a small table that had nothing on it but a bottle and an ashtray. "He's stronger than the doctors say," one of them muttered. "It's been 3 weeks. He should have gone by now." "The new maid," another said. "Something's changed since she arrived." "It's not the maid." The third man, older, with a scar along his jaw, leaned back in his chair. "It's the boy. He's letting the kid in past security, past all of us." The first man laughed, short and humorless. "The 5-year-old is not our problem. If the old man lives another month," the scarred man said quietly, "everything changes. The will, the accounts, all of it. He's already asked Ricci to draft new language. You understand what that means for us." Silence settled over the table. "Then we make sure he doesn't get another month," the first man said. A phone buzzed on the table. The scarred man answered it without a greeting, listened for a long moment, and finally said only, "Understood. Keep doing what you're doing. No one upstairs suspects a thing." He set the phone down. Somewhere inside the Moretti mansion, behind a door no one thought to lock, in a role no one thought to question, someone was already working against the old man's heart, one quiet betrayal at a time. 3 weeks in, the mansion had started to feel less like a fortress, and more like a place Elena and Noah actually lived. She learned which floorboards creaked outside the kitchen, which guard would let Noah keep a biscuit if she looked the other way, which hours belonged to Vittorio's rest and which belonged quietly to her son. But routine had a way of sharpening her eyes. And lately what Elena noticed didn't sit right. The pill organizer in Vittorio's medical room never quite matched the chart pinned beside it. Some mornings a bottle she'd catalogued the day before was simply gone, replaced by one with a different label, a different manufacturer, sitting in the exact same spot as if no one expected her to look twice. She told herself she was imagining it. She told herself grief and exhaustion made people see patterns that weren't there. Then there were the relatives. Luca Moretti arrived like weather. Sudden, loud, impossible to ignore. He kissed his uncle's forehead with a warmth that never once reached his eyes. Called the staff by name in a voice built for cameras. And always arrived within the hour of Ricci's black sedan pulling through the gate. "Uncle, you're looking stronger," he said one afternoon, loud enough for the hallway to hear, while his eyes catalogued the room like a man taking inventory of something he already considered his. His sister Sophia was quieter but no less thorough. She walked the east wing with a decorator's notebook, pausing in front of drawn curtains and dusty portraits, murmuring about what could be freshened up once things were settled. She said settled the way other people said funeral, and never once looked at Vittorio when she said it. Neither of them looked at Noah at all. To Luca and Sophia, the boy playing quietly by the fireplace was furniture, beneath their notice, beneath their concern, exactly the way they'd already decided their uncle's remaining days were beneath any real grief. What they didn't understand, what none of the relatives who circled the house understood, was how much had already changed beneath their notice. Rosa laughs now, actual laughter, over trays of shortbread Noah insisted on helping bake, which mostly meant flour on the floor and frosting on his nose. The kitchen staff, who used to move through their shifts in careful silence, had started leaving the radio on low. Even Marco, Silent, unreadable Marco, who Elena had assumed communicated exclusively through nods, had begun greeting her in the mornings with actual words, and once, astonishingly, a joke about the weather that Elena suspected he'd been saving all week. And Vittorio, though he'd never admitted, had developed a habit that made Rosa smile behind his back. If 4 o'clock came and went without the small knock at his study door, he found reasons to ask, "Where is the boy today?" he said once, gruffly, as if the question annoyed him. "Napping, sir," Rosa answered, not bothering to hide her smile. "Fine," he muttered, and turned back to his window, though his eyes kept drifting to the door for another hour. It was during one of these quiet afternoons, while cross-referencing the pharmacy delivery slips against the chart Vittorio's doctor had left, that Elena's stomach dropped. His heart medication, the one dosage that could not be missed, could not be substituted, could not be late by even a day without real danger, didn't match. 3 deliveries in the last 2 weeks. 2 showed on the chart as administered. The math didn't work. Either someone was logging doses that were never given, or someone was giving doses that were never logged, and either possibility made Elena's hands go cold. She told herself it could be a clerical error. Understaffed households made mistakes. But she copied the numbers down anyway, in a small notebook she kept hidden beneath her mattress, and she didn't tell anyone yet. Not Rosa, not Marco, and certainly not the family circling this house like it already belonged to them. That evening, Vittorio sat by the window longer than usual, watching the last light fade over the dead garden, and for once he didn't reach for the whiskey at all. He was 7 years old again in his memory, a one-room apartment above a shuttered bakery, his mother's hands, cracked from other people's laundry, smoothing his hair. Before she left for a second shift she never should have had to work. He remembered the sound of the door 3 nights later, not hers, and the men who came looking for money that was never theirs. He remembered being too small to do anything but watch. He had built an empire so that he would never again be the boy standing in a doorway, powerless. He had told himself for 50 years that the empire had been worth it. Lately, watching a small boy draw crooked houses on his study floor, he was no longer certain that was true. It was well past midnight when Elena, unable to sleep, went to check the med cabinet log one final time. The medical room door was ajar. A single lamp burned inside. She stopped in the shadow of the hallway, breath caught in her throat, as she watched Luca Moretti, dressed for bed, moving with the practiced quiet of a man who had done this before, carefully replace one small bottle for another on the shelf, then slip the original into his jacket pocket and disappear back down the hall without a sound. Elena didn't move from the shadows until Luca's footsteps faded down the hall. Her heart was still hammering when the first crack of thunder rolled over the estate, so loud the windows shivered in their frames. She barely had time to process what she'd seen before the lights flickered once, twice, and died. The mansion plunged into total darkness. For a moment there was only the storm, rain lashing the windows, wind screaming through the old chimneys, and then, underneath it, a sound that made every hair on Elena's arms rise. A door being forced. Somewhere below, glass shattering. Intruders. Marco's voice tore through the blackness, already moving, already barking orders into a radio that crackled uselessly. Security's down. All units. Defensive positions. Now. Elena's first thought was Noah. She ran. She didn't know the mansion well enough to run through it blind. But she ran anyway, one hand trailing the wall, counting doors, calling his name in a whisper that felt too loud and not loud enough all at once. Gunfire erupted somewhere behind her, sharp, close, wrong in a way that made her stomach drop through the floor. She heard men shouting in a language she didn't recognize. She heard Rosa scream from the kitchen wing, "Noah!" A small hand found hers in the dark before his voice did. He'd been hiding exactly where she'd taught him to hide, in the linen closet off the servants' corridor, exactly like they practiced for fires that were never supposed to be real. She pulled him into her arms so hard he gasped, and for one suspended second she let herself believe that was the worst of it. It wasn't. "We have to get you somewhere safe," she whispered. And Noah, for the first time since they'd arrived at this house, didn't argue. She found an alcove behind a fallen tapestry, pressed him into it, made him promise Noah, on everything, that he would not move until she came back. Then she went looking for Vittorio, because some instinct older than fear told her no one else would. She found him exactly where Dread told her she would. Alone in his study, wheelchair jammed against an overturned bookshelf, the study door hanging open to a hallway lit only by lightning. He was struggling against the chair with the useless fury of a man who had once needed no one and needed everyone now. "Get out," he snapped when he saw her, voice raw. "Leave me. Get the boy and go." No. Elena was already behind the chair, throwing her weight against the shelf until it gave. Not happening. Footsteps pounded closer down the hall. Too many, too fast, none of them Marco's. There was no time to think. Elena remembered Rosa mentioning it once in passing, a service passage behind the old fireplace, built decades ago for staff who weren't meant to be seen. She found the seam in the panel with fingers that wouldn't stop shaking, shoved it open, and pushed Vittoria's wheelchair through into a narrow stone corridor that smelled of dust and years. "How do you know about this?" Vittoria demanded, breathless as she sealed the panel behind them. "I don't. I'm guessing." She kept pushing. "Keep quiet." The tunnel led them in a slow curve back toward the servants' wing, toward Noah. When they emerged, Elena's whole body went cold with relief. He was exactly where she'd left him, small and shaking but unhurt, pressed into the alcove with his eyes squeezed shut. She gathered him against her side without slowing, keeping Vittoria's chair moving with her free hand, guiding all three of them toward the kitchen exit where Marco's voice was still shouting orders through the chaos. By the time they reached him, Marco and two of the loyal guards had cornered the last of the intruders against the garden wall. The gunfire thinned, then stopped. Sirens wailed somewhere far down the gravel drive. Someone, somewhere, in the house, had gotten a call out after all. It was over almost as fast as it had begun. In the wreckage that followed, 3 of the attackers lay wounded and were taken into custody. 2 more had fled into the storm before Marco's men could close the perimeter. The kitchen staff emerged one by one from the pantry where they'd huddled through the worst of it, pale and shaking, counting each other off by name until everyone was accounted for. Rosa found Elena first, pulling her and Noah both into an embrace that said more than words could have managed. Marco, blood on his sleeve that wasn't his own, confirmed grimly what everyone already suspected. The security failure hadn't been the storm. Someone had disabled the system from inside, timed to the exact hour the power would already be vulnerable, a level of precision no outside enemy could have managed alone. 2 junior guards, already under quiet suspicion for weeks, were escorted off the property before dawn, their explanations thin and their loyalty, in the end, worth exactly nothing. Traitors. Exposed, Marco said grimly to Elena as the sky began to lighten, though clearly, from the tightness in his jaw, not the only one still standing inside these walls. Hours later, once the ambulances and police had gone and the house had gone eerily silent again, Elena found Vittorio alone by the cold fireplace in his study, staring at the panel she'd pushed him through. "You could have run," he said, not looking at her. "You had the boy. You had every reason to leave me in that chair and save yourselves." "I thought about it," Elena admitted, for about a second. Something in his face shifted. Not quite a smile, but close enough to be its ancestor. "Nobody has risked their life for mine before," he said quietly. "Not in 50 years. Not once." "You're still someone's life to save," Elena said. "That doesn't stop being true just because you've decided it isn't." Vittorio said nothing for a long moment. Outside, the storm was finally beginning to pass, thunder rolling farther and farther into the distance. "Get some rest, Miss Yin." "Carter," he said at last, and his voice carried nothing sharp in it. No order, no bitterness, just something close to gratitude. Elena nodded and turned to go, exhaustion finally catching up with every hour of the night. But at the doorway she paused, glancing back at a panel behind the fireplace, the one only staff were supposed to know about, the one someone inside this house had clearly known about too, long before tonight. The attackers had failed. 2 traitors were gone, but the ease with which the security system had gone dark, the precision of the timing, the fact that someone had known exactly which hour to strike, none of it sat right. Somewhere beyond these walls, whoever had planned tonight was still free, and somewhere inside them, Elena was certain now, someone else had helped make it possible. Someone who had smiled at her in the hallway that very morning and would likely smile at her again tomorrow. By morning, the police had come and gone, and the official story had already hardened into place. An attempted robbery, opportunists exploiting the storm and the outage, Nothing more. Ricci handled the statements with the practiced calm of a man who'd smoothed over worse. No mention of disabled security systems. No mention of 2 guards escorted off the property before sunrise. No mention of the traitor still walking the halls with everyone else. Elena said nothing to the officers either, though it cost her something to stay quiet. She had promised Marco she would at least until they understood who they were really dealing with. Not some random opportunist off the street, but someone who knew this house's rhythms too well to have stumbled onto them by chance. The story the officers wrote down bore no resemblance to the truth, and Elena watched them leave with a strange, hollow feeling, as if the danger had been quietly filed away instead of dealt with. But the silence didn't stop the questions gnawing at her, about the mismatched medication log, about Luca slipping out of the medical room at midnight, about a slow, careful pattern that had nothing to do with any storm. She waited 3 days before she acted on it. Dr. Alvarez had been Vittorio's physician for 11 years, long enough that Rosa trusted him without hesitation, long enough that Elena decided he was the one person in this house's orbit worth the risk. She met him outside the estate in the parking lot of a pharmacy 2 towns over and handed him a small, unlabeled vial she'd quietly taken from the cabinet, along with the notebook where she'd copied every mismatched dosage for 2 weeks. I could be wrong, she told him. I hope I'm wrong. He called her 4 days later, his voice tight in a way that told her everything before he said a word. You're not wrong, Miss Carter. A pause heavy enough to feel through the phone. The medication in that vial isn't what the label says. It's a diluted substitute. Enough to look correct on paper, not enough to do what his heart actually needs, combined with the missed doses you documented. Someone has been very deliberately, very patiently, weakening him for months. This wasn't a single mistake. This took planning, and it took repeating, week after week, by someone with real access to that cabinet. Elena had to sit down. Do you know who? Dr. Alvarez asked carefully. She thought of Luca's easy laugh, his hand on his uncle's shoulder, the timing that always placed him near the medical room whenever Ricci's car came up the drive. She thought of Sophia's notebook full of renovation plans for rooms that weren't hers yet, of the way she spoke about settling things, as though her uncle's death were already a formality on a checklist. She didn't have proof strong enough for police, not yet, but she had enough to know with sick certainty exactly the shape of what she was looking at. I have a guess, she said quietly. I wish I didn't. She didn't tell Vittorio that night. She told herself it was because she needed more evidence first, needed Marco's help, needed a plan that wouldn't collapse the moment Luca caught wind of it. The truth was simpler and harder. She didn't know how to hand a dying man proof that his own blood had been trying to hurry his death along, and she couldn't bear to be the one who said it out loud before she absolutely had to. That night, exhaustion and grief pulling at her in equal measure, she found Noah curled on the study rug beside Vittorio's wheelchair, fast asleep with one hand still resting against the old man's arm. Vittorio hadn't moved him. He sat perfectly still instead, watching the boy breathe, an expression on his face Elena had never once seen there. Something unguarded, something almost young. Leave him, he said quietly, when she moved to lift Noah away. Please. Elena sat down instead, across from him, close enough to speak without waking her son. You don't have to tell me anything, she said. I know. Vittorio was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the boy's small hand against his sleeve. I want to, anyway. I don't know why. I haven't told anyone this in 50 years. She waited. My mother cleaned houses, he said finally, his voice low, rough with disuse. Wealthy houses in a wealthy part of a city that never once let her forget she didn't belong in them. She raised me alone in one room above a bakery that closed years before I was born. She worked herself to nothing for me, and she never once complained where I could hear it. I remember her hands more than her face, some days, cracked, always cold, even in summer, from the buckets of water she carried. Elena said nothing. Across the room, Noah shifted in his sleep, murmuring something wordless. When I was 7, men came looking for money that was never hers to owe. She'd found work for a family with debts of their own, debts she knew nothing about. It didn't matter to the men who came for it. His jaw tightened. I watched. I was small enough to hide, and I hid. And I have spent every day since hating the boy who hid instead of doing something. You were 7, Elena said softly. I told myself that for a long time. Then I told myself something else instead, that I would never again be small enough to hide from anything. I built something so large that no one could ever come for me the way they came for her. He shook his head slowly. Revenge became power. Power became cruelty, because cruelty was the only language that kept men afraid of me instead of the other way around. And cruelty, I have learned far too late, becomes nothing in the end but an empty house and a wheelchair, and a family circling like vultures for what's left. The fire had burned low. Outside, the wind moved quietly through the dead garden. I don't deserve forgiveness, Vittoria whispered, so quietly Elena almost missed it. Not from her, not from anyone. Noah stirred, blinking awake just enough to hear the last of it, though he couldn't have understood the weight behind the words. He didn't ask what they meant. He simply pushed himself upright, still half asleep, and wrapped both arms around Vittoria's tattooed hand. Maybe, he mumbled, already drifting back towards sleep. But everybody deserves a hug. Vittorio Moretti, the most feared man in the city, sat frozen in his wheelchair with a sleeping child's arms around his hand, and said nothing at all because for the first time in 50 years, he was crying too hard to speak. The fire had gone out entirely now, and neither of them moved to relight it, content, for once, to simply sit together in the dark. Morning came grey and quiet. The fire long since gone cold. Noah still asleep against Vittoria's chair when Dr. Tawny Alvarez arrived unannounced, his face set in the grim, careful way of a man who had come to deliver news. He wished he didn't have to. I ran a full panel overnight, he said. Once Elena had gently carried Noah off to bed, and Rosa had drawn every door in the study shut. There's no ambiguity left, Vittoria. Someone has been poisoning you, slowly, deliberately, for months. Your heart is weaker than it should be at this stage. Weaker than it would have been if you'd simply been left alone to fight this the way your body knows how. Vittorio's face didn't change, but his knuckles went white against the arms of his wheelchair. How long have I actually had if this hadn't happened? Alvarez hesitated. Longer. I can't say how much, but longer. I can't say how much, but longer. The silence that followed was heavier than any gunfire. The mansion had survived 2 nights before. By noon, Ricci had assembled the family in the grand dining room. Luca, Sofia, 2 cousins who rarely visited unless money was involved, under the pretense of discussing Vittoria's care going forward. Elena stood near the doorway, close enough to hear, while Marco positioned 2 guards at every exit, his jaw set in a way that made clear this was not a meeting anyone would be permitted to leave early. Vittorio wheeled himself to the head of the table without help from anyone. I know what's been done to me, he said, and the room went utterly still. I know who had access to that cabinet. I know who visited only when Ricci's car was in the drive. I have laboratory results, medication logs, and a physician of 20 years willing to testify to all of it. Luca's smile faltered for the first time Elena had ever seen. Uncle, this is absurd. Whatever you think, you know. I know you replaced my heart medication with a diluted substitute, Vittoria said, quiet and precise, and that you did it slowly enough to hope no one would notice before I was gone. I know your sister has already picked new curtains for a house that isn't hers. Sophia's composure cracked into something colder. You have no proof of intent. A mistake in the pharmacy. Save it for the investigators, Marco said flatly from the doorway. Luca stood, chair scraping hard against the floor. You would believe a maid over your own blood? I believe evidence over anyone, Vittorio said. Blood or not. And you, of all people, should have known I never needed much convincing once I saw proof in front of me. Sophia reached for her brother's arm. Her voice pitched lower now, almost pleading. Uncle, whatever mistakes were made, surely we can discuss this as a family, without lawyers, without strangers in the room. The strangers in this room, Vittorio said, are the only ones who never lied to me. No one at that table had ever seen him this calm. It frightened him more than his temper ever had. Over the following days, the mansion transformed in ways Elena hadn't imagined possible. Ricci, visibly shaken by how close he'd come to notarizing a will built on a lie, worked around the clock at Vittoria's direction, drafting an entirely new one. Investigators arrived quietly, methodically, collecting decades of records Vittorio handed over himself, shell accounts, falsified ledgers, the architecture of an empire he no longer wished to leave standing. Illegal accounts were frozen one by one. Every relative who had circled hoping for inheritance was formally, permanently cut off, their names struck from documents that had once assumed their loyalty. Marco disappeared into the garden the afternoon the last account was frozen, and Elena found him there, an hour later, sitting alone on an overturned crate, wiping his face with the back of his hand before he realized she'd seen him. 15 years I've guarded that man, he said, voice rough. 15 years I thought loyalty meant staying quiet. I didn't know it could look like this instead. Rosa cried too, openly, pulling Elena into a hug so fierce it nearly knocked the breath out of her. You saved this house, Rosa whispered. Not the guards, not the lawyers. You and that boy of yours. That evening, Noah tugged at Elena's sleeve while she tucked him in, brow furrowed with the seriousness only a 5-year-old could manage. Mommy, does this mean Mr. V is becoming a good grandpa now? Elena laughed despite everything the week had held, tears rising unexpectedly to her eyes. I think it might mean exactly that, baby. Down the hall, though neither of them could have known it, Vittorio sat alone with the very same thought. He asked for Noah the next morning, earlier than usual, his voice unusual gentle when Elena brought the boy in. Noah climbed straight into the space beside the wheelchair, like he'd done it 100 times, which, by now, he nearly had. I need to tell you something, Vittorio said, and for the first time his hands trembled slightly as he spoke. I spent my life making children cry, Noah. Not on purpose, not always, but I built something that hurt people, hurt families, hurt children like the one I used to be. Noah considered this with his usual unhurried seriousness. That sounds sad. It is. Vittorio's voice caught. I don't know how to fix all of it. I don't know if I can. Noah didn't answer with words at first. He simply climbed further into the space beside the chair and wrapped both arms around Vittorio's middle, holding on the way children hold on to the things they've decided, without needing a reason, are worth holding. Then make today different, he said simply. Vittorio Moretti, feared by soldiers, abandoned by family, hardened by 50 years of grief he'd never once let himself feel, broke completely, silently, his shoulders shaking with a grief and relief too tangled together to separate. He held the boy back like he was the only solid thing left in the world. And for once, he didn't try to stop the tears at all. Elena watched from the doorway, her own eyes wet, believing for the first time that whatever time was left might actually be enough. Doctor! Alvarez found her an hour later in the hallway, his expression the kind that made her stomach drop before he said a single word. Elena! He glanced back toward the study, lowering his voice. The new blood work came back, the damage from the poisoning. It's more advanced than we realized. I need to speak with him, and with you. How long? Elena asked, already knowing she didn't want the answer. Dr. Alvarez hesitated, and in that hesitation, she understood. Days, he said quietly. Maybe less. Down the hall, she could still hear Noah's small voice through the study door, chattering happily about nothing at all, entirely unaware that the clock had just started counting down in earnest. The house grew quiet in the days that followed. Quiet in the way a place gets when everyone in it is holding their breath together. Vittorio slept more, spoke less, but every afternoon at 4 o'clock, without fail, Noah still climbed into the chair beside him, and Vittorio still made himself stay awake for it. The new will was drawn, signed, and witnessed on a Tuesday morning. By Tuesday night, someone had decided it would never take effect. Marco felt it before he saw it. A stillness in the perimeter cameras, a gap in the guard rotation that shouldn't have existed. He'd doubled security since the storm, trusted no one who hadn't been with the family a decade or more. And still, at 11 that night, 3 vehicles came up the service road with their headlights dark. They're moving before it's official, Marco said grimly, already radioing every loyal guard on the property. Someone told them the signing already happened. This time, there was no outage to hide behind. Marco's men were ready at the gates, ready at the tree line, ready in windows that had been dark and empty for years, and were suddenly, quietly, full of men who had decided 15 years of loyalty meant something after all. The attackers made it as far as the garden wall before the exchange of gunfire brought police sirens up the gravel drive faster than anyone expected, because this time Marco had called them himself hours before. The moment the gap in the cameras told him what was coming, it was over in minutes. 2 of Luca's hired men were taken into custody at the wall. A third, cornered near the old fountain, gave up his employer's name before the handcuffs even closed. Luca was arrested at dawn, dragged from his hotel room in handcuffs while cameras from 3 news vans captured every second of it. Sophia, questioned separately, broke within the hour, offering names, dates, and bank transfers in exchange for whatever leniency her lawyer could negotiate. By noon, what remained of the Moretti criminal empire, the captains, the shell companies, the decades of quiet fear that had kept a city looking away, had collapsed entirely. Undone not by a rival gang or a federal raid, but by the very family that had built it, turning on itself the moment its heart stopped beating for them. Vittorio didn't have the strength to hear the details until the following afternoon. Elena told him anyway, sitting beside his bed while Noah napped in the next room, and watched something in his face finally, fully unclench. "It's finished," he said quietly. "All of it. It's finished," she agreed. He was quiet for a long moment, his breathing slower than it had been even a week before. "I need to speak with you, alone, while I still can." Elena took his hand. "The house is yours," he said, before she could argue. "Not a gift, Elena. A debt I'm only partly able to repay. You gave me back things I thought I'd buried with my mother, and you did it while risking everything, with nothing waiting for you if it went wrong. Vittorio, let me finish." His grip tightened. Weak but certain. "There's a trust for Noah. Enough that he'll never know the fear you carried into this house. Enough for whatever he wants to become." His voice broke slightly. "He gave me back the boy I buried 50 years ago in that apartment. I can't repay a debt like that. I can only try." Elena couldn't speak past the tightness in her throat, so she simply held his hand tighter, and he seemed to understand that as answer enough. He died 3 nights later, quietly, in the hour just before dawn. There were no soldiers in the room, no lawyers, no captains, no photograph of an empire he'd spent a lifetime building. There was Rosa, holding a cup of tea she never drank, murmuring a prayer under her breath. There was Marco, standing at the foot of the bed the way he'd stood at posts for 15 years, except this time his eyes were openly wet and he made no effort to hide it. There was Dr. Alvarez, monitoring nothing now but presence because there was nothing left to fix. And there was Noah, small hand wrapped around Vittorio's, exactly where it had been almost every afternoon for weeks. "Are you scared, Mr. V?" Noah whispered. Vittorio's eyes found Elena first, then the boy, and the faintest trace of something that might, at last, have been peace settled over his face. "Not anymore," he whispered back. He closed his eyes a few minutes later, and did not open them again. Noah held his hand until well after it had gone still, and no one in the room had the heart to tell him it was time to let go. The Moretti estate no longer felt like a fortress. The iron gate stood open now more often than not, and the gravel drive that had once carried black sedans and armed convoys carried instead a small yellow school bus twice a week, dropping children off for afternoons at the new foundation that had taken the mansion's name and rewritten its purpose. The old security office had become a classroom, its monitors replaced with bookshelves. The room where captains once plotted inheritance now held toy trucks and finger paint. Widows found housing assistants in offices that had once processed extortion payments. Orphaned children took art classes in a ballroom that had sat dark for decades. Its curtains finally, permanently open. The Moretti Hope Foundation. The sign at the gate read now, and beneath it, smaller, for widows, single parents, orphaned children, and survivors who deserve a second beginning. Noah ran through the garden that afternoon, laughing, chasing nothing in particular, the way only a 6-year-old with an entire summer ahead of him could. Elena watched from the porch, a cup of coffee warm in her hands, in a house that had once terrified her, and now simply felt like home. In the entrance hall, framed and lit properly for the first time, hung a child's crayon drawing, a lonely man in a wheelchair, a small boy holding his hand, and underneath, in careless, uneven letters, "Nobody is too scary to be loved." Elena paused in front of it every morning, the way she had every morning since it was hung there, and every morning it undid her a little, in the best possible way. Vittorio Moretti was remembered in that city for many things once: fear, power, an empire built on other people's silence, a name people once lowered their voices to say aloud. But in the end, none of that was what lasted. What lasted was smaller, quieter, and far more powerful than anything he'd ever built with his own two hands. The simple, unstoppable kindness of a little boy who was never, not once, afraid to sit beside him,